welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who last fixed a bug by himself in 2004, and even then, not by himself.
Too long ago. Yeah, great. That was a good inside joke to a conversation we had offline. Yeah, where I was
I was so appreciative this morning when I was thinking of what I was going to say about you, that you had provided me with what I needed to say about you.
The silver platter. Yeah. Well, congratulations on being close on Tacoma, right? So, yeah. Are you guys submitted?
Only a couple weeks ago, we submitted to pre-cert, and that came back, and we're about to submit to cert later this week on the Xbox, and of course Steam. They just kind of let you. It's the Wild West still there. You can just kind of submit up to the last day. Here's the thing, download it. But yeah, we're doing a bunch of stuff, sending things out to reviewers soon, and just we're in the thick of it. So my life is.
That's how the bug thing.
My life is for ire, as they say.
That's how the bug thing came up. You were fixing bugs, and I said exactly. I hadn't fixed a bug since 2004.
Which is funny because I mostly didn't actually fill out the bug database for myself for at least 10 years. Like since LucasArts, I've never had to go and do that. I just had producers do it, and now I'm actually having to go in and type, I fixed this thing. And this
you're doing it all.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. Well, but enough about that. We're here to talk about Half-Life, and we are very excited to have our second guest on, Dario Casali, who is here from Valve. He is still at Valve, as opposed to Marc Laidlaw, who we talked to last week, who is recently departed from Valve. But Dario, to give a little bit of background for the audience on Dario, kind of one of those infamous level designers from way back in the day. We're going to hopefully talk to him about some of the old war stories from even before Valve in his modding days. But he and his brother actually worked on a pretty infamous addition to that ended up in Final Doom, the Plutonia experiment, and then also also a Quake. I think it was 7-level episode. Progeny special edition, I think it was that what it was called? Prodigy, right? And then also some of the most infamous multiplayer levels really around when it comes to Team Fortress Classic, Dust Bowl, for instance, Gold Rush for TF2, right? Is that correct? Yep. So holy cow, those are some heavy hitters as far as levels go for MP. And then also some single-player levels for Half-Life and Half-Life 2 that I'm hopefully we can get into today. So, and you joined back in '96, joined Valve, coming out of Oxford, right? Studying economics.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I finished that degree, and I want to do anything but that.
Good.
All right.
Yeah, so you've been at Valve a long time. So
coming up on 21 years.
Yeah. That's amazing. Another rarity in the industry, to be honest, right? A lot of us move around a fair amount, but you and Marc were both there for quite a long time. So welcome, Dario. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having us.
So we talked, like we talked about in the pre-show, we played Half-Life, and we want to talk specifically about that for most of the time, but it's a really, really rare opportunity to have somebody who was in the modding scene back in the Doom and Quake days. And so we wanted to at least start off there a little bit, and if you have any memory of that era of your life, which maybe you've blocked out, but and we Brett and I have touched on it a little bit here and there when we've talked about, because we're playing older games, on the podcast, so it comes up from time to time. There really wasn't an indie community back then, but as Brett mentioned in pre-show, modding was really kind of the indie, spirit and community back in those days, the cultural aspect of it. So, how did you get into modding back in those days, and what was your entry point to even knowing that this was a thing? Were you a computer guy back then, or?
When I started university, I got my first computer, and I guess I was getting pretty bored with my course, so I just started playing loads of games that I could find, and back then there weren't that many. I'm thinking this was probably 1993, something around there, where all of the PC games were top-down or side-scroller, or they were all VGA graphics, 320 by 200. I just played every single game that I could get my hand on, which back then wasn't that many that I could find. I'd get magazines every week and use those to buy games that I could find. I was just playing a ton of games. When Doom came out, I just thought, wow, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. I had this crummy 386 DX40, I think it was, something like that, with 4 megabytes of RAM, or maybe 2 megabytes or something, but not good enough to play Doom anyway. When I saw my friend running it, I just thought, wow, this is the coolest game ever. I have to buy a computer that's good enough to play this. So I did. I went out and I spent pretty much all of my money, all of my student money, which is almost nothing, to buy this computer. I just started playing Doom endlessly. And then my brother went and got a computer. That's my younger brother, Milo, who I built Plutonio Experiment with. He got a computer, and then the day that I'll never forget the day we hooked up our computers using a serial port or serial cable.
Magic.
We're playing in the same game, which is like, wow, this is a game that's just transcended anything we can imagine on a computer. Like, wow, we're in the same game. And that just captivated us, so we played endless hours of Doom. So many that we started to get really bored with the standard maps. So when I picked up a copy of, I think it was PC Review or PC Gamer or something, way back in the day, they had a Doom level editor, and I was hooked immediately that night. Yeah. Moving exploding barrels around and stuff like that was pretty much the first thing I ever did. But it was the obsession, it was the complete obsession with playing the game over and over and over that led to that interest in modifying it.
And then, so what was the path to, the Plutonian experiment and its inclusion to Final Doom? I mean, modding was such a weird kind of, grassroots and, kind of punk rock kind of thing in a way. And like, how was it discovered? Because I feel like any modder that I know of that era has a different story, and it's always kind of very weird and different from. So like, what was the path that kind of got onto that disc?
Well, mine started through were they mailing lists? I think there was a Doom editing mailing list.
Right.
It was Rec Games Doom or something or other. I can't remember. Is that what they call it? The editing mailing lists?
Back
Usenet.
Usenet stuff.
Usenet. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was a Usenet mailing list that a lot of people congregated around to talk about tricks of how to run the editor and how to troubleshoot when things went wrong, and explanation of how things worked and stuff. So there was a congregation of people who just hung out there pretty regularly. And then eventually we'd start sharing files as well, like sharing map ideas and examples and stuff. And I think that and the CD-ROM.com, the Walnut Creek or whatever it was called, started hosting files, so we would post them and then we'd get feedback and then we'd talk about them. So I think that's pretty much where we started, or at least when I started first sharing work.
That was the community, essentially, was built around that.
That is where the community that I was involved with sprung up from. It was those the Usenet mailing groups.
And
I think I think the Master Levels or something was the first I ever heard of a community of people actually selling or actually making any money out of it, like becoming professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And so we thought, wow, we could actually do this. And I think that was the roots of the Team TNT thing, where a group of us got together and thought, well, we'll put a group of levels together. We didn't know we were going to sell it to anybody, but we'd at least kind of collaborate and come out with something greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, that was a really kind of a weird time in community sourcing generally. Like, I mean, I remember, we had a colleague, oh my God, I'm going to have to think about his name, but it'll come back to me. But we had a colleague at LucasArts who had basically gotten in the industry in much the same way.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more than one, but I know you're going to think of the same person I was. But was it Klie? Klie, right?
Chris Klie.
Klie. Yep. So Chris Klie had done the same sort of thing, and famously claimed in his interview that the best times in his life had been sitting in front of his computer making mods in his underwear. Somehow he still got into the industry as a professional. But the same thing was happening in other stuff too. I mean, I was at Penn at the time, and like Magic the Gathering's first handful of expansions were all basically community source. We just happened to know Richard Garfield or whatever. So it was a really weird, strange time. Like everybody, I mean, most of our listeners, I think, probably are familiar with being able to connect with people that you don't know through the internet. But I'm trying to stress, I guess, at this time, that was so extraordinary and strange.
Yeah.
That it was like, I don't know, it's like hearing from somebody on the moon would be today. Like it just doesn't happen. You don't have those opportunities to talk to people who aren't near you geographically, at the time anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it was a totally, there's just the internet, right? Just was the early days of that coming together. So can you then connect the dots a little bit for us to Valve and so, through Doom and Quake stuff, I guess you were recognized or noticed there, and then somebody from Valve contacted you, or how did that come to pass?
I would love for it to be like that, but it's a little less glamorous, I suppose. I did, after I left university, I started working on Quake stuff, and I really wanted to work with the id guys because I'd worked with them before, and I'd always really held them in really high esteem and stuff. So as soon as I left university, I thought, oh, shit, I have to actually get a job, and I would love to work with these guys. So I emailed Shawn Green, and I think it was American McGee, and both of them said that they're not hiring at the moment because they're working on Quake 2. So I was a little bit bummed, but then Shawn said, hey, these guys up in Seattle are talking to us about licensing our engine. Maybe you should talk to them. So I think within the same day, before I could even investigate who Valve were, I read a posting on that Doom Editing alias, or the Doom Editing news group, and it was from a guy called Ted Backman at Valve, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll just respond to this then. So I sent him a really cocky email saying, I definitely do this. I think he actually wrote in his posting that they were working with the Quake 2 engine or something. So I just wrote back and I said, well, how can that possibly be? There is no such thing as a Quake 2 engine yet. But anyway, that was how I got in touch with Valve, and they flew me out to interview a couple of weeks later. They also wanted to interview Milo, but he was still at university doing his degree at the time, so he declined. So it was just me on my way out in November '96.
Wow. And the rest is history there, huh?
Yeah, I got the job that trip, and I got back as soon as I could, but the INS curious, made it difficult.
What did they ask you in the interview?
It was that was such a fun interview. I was so excited to be working with other people professionally on games that it was kind of like a big head rush for 48 hours. I got to the Valve office. Let's see. I wasn't used. I had no idea where Seattle was, so I think I might have packed. Well, no, it was November, so I didn't. I was assuming or hoping that it would be sunny, warm, beachy, or something like that. But I got there and it was cold, dark, raining, endless traffic jams. So by the time I got to the office, it was probably 4 p.m. or something. And everywhere they were doing this open office thing. I guess they hadn't been in the office for very long, so they opened up their office to everybody in the building. So I walked in, and there were all these people around. And they're all in suits and ties and stuff. And I was thinking, wow, this does not look like a group of game developers. And sure enough, I think there were about 10 Valve employees there and about 50 total people. So I found Gabe, and he said, "Oh yeah, we're just showing the office to everybody else today." The rest of the time,
like that they shared the building with, or whatever.
That they shared the building with, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
like neighbors, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But it was. I mean, I found it.
What a funny day to come in.
Yeah, it was kind of unsettling a little bit, but everyone was really friendly, and we were just we were really excited to meet each other because we all had this shared passion about really wanting to make great games. And I think the conversation over the 48 hours it was really easy and really natural for me because we were just basically talking about what we really wanted to do. I had brought an external hard drive with me, so I showed them all the stuff that I was doing for Quake. And they made me go through quite a few of my Doom levels to show, that I was the one who had done the work. And when I would say things like, "Oh, you can tell that that Milo and I had been working on this set of levels," they would ask me why, and they would make sure that all of the stuff that I was showing them I could explain. But it was such a nice, easy, organic couple of days that it flew by really quickly. And they gave me an offer on the second day.
Yeah, that was one of the things that Marc Laidlaw last week had called out about how the sort of genesis of Valve's original staff was mostly people culled from the Quake and Doom community. And I mean, what it sounds to me is like your interview was more of like an interview between peers rather than like, "Oh, we're this established thing," and
it was not an institutional thing by any means.
Yeah.
It was like
kind of comfortable and interesting. Yeah, that's cool.
It felt to me like a group of individual contributors who didn't really know each other very well, but had a shared vision for making just the best stuff that they possibly could. And that's the vibe that I felt. That's why I felt really comfortable accepting a job there, because I felt like everybody was, as dedicated as I was to doing absolutely a world-class job on whatever it is they were doing, which was really, really refreshing and obvious.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a really great feeling to have that connection and then feel that confident. I mean, especially when you're moving overseas and, and kind of just committing to something huge.
Yeah, not only that, but to Seattle. Land of gray and dark winters.
Hey, I like it here.
And rain, yeah.
No, it's good. It's good.
It's good now. Yeah, I'm looking out the window and I can see blue sky and sun. So
me too.
Does have its moments.
So Marc started. He was sort of sharing his early days, but he started after you, right? Maybe did he? Was it 98? Did he say?
No, he started
97
after me.
Okay,
yeah,
97. Okay. Well, so can you? So jumping into the game that we've been talking about, obviously with Half-Life. Look, what were the early days of that? And it's like, how were you influencing that? And what state were things when you started? And kind of and just kind of work us through the early days of that kind of inclusion. Like
the earliest memories I have from Half-Life, the project was called Quiver. I don't know why we called it Quiver, but there were some 3D studio rendered images of some silo interiors. There was a soldier grunt model, like a human grunt model, made probably of like 25 polygons or something, I don't know. And they were just working on getting colored lighting in. I remember that too. But mostly it was
just pieces.
It literally was that. It was pieces. In fact, to Marc's credit, when he came in, he started kind of giving us a structure for a story and started bringing those pieces together a lot quicker than had he not been there. Because when I arrived, I looked at the specification of what we had, and we were focusing on a couple of different areas, and I dived in and started building stuff using what I had at the time, but it was quite fragmented. The first map I ever built for Half-Life actually ended up shipping, which I'm kind of floored by now, because we threw away so much work in Half-Life.
Yeah.
But the very, very first brushes I laid for Half-Life were, I believe it's C2A1. I can't remember the name of the chapter.
Yeah, so I was gonna actually follow up with, like, one of the things that we haven't talked about is, like, if we were to actually say which levels were yours, and you can describe them more descriptively rather than trying to remember the names, and we'll try to connect the names up. But one of the things that Marc described was a bunch of level designers making levels that they then kind of try to shoehorn into a natural progression, like something that felt self-contained and connected in some way, just because of how you'd all come from these independent areas. But, I mean, so you said C2A1. I'll try to figure out what that is.
That was the one...
What else?
That was the one where there's some trains and like a switching thing, and then the...
Oh, okay, yeah.
It was
all right,
intro to the Gargantua.
Right. Sure. Okay. Yeah, I can come up with that name.
So that was on a rail? Is it on a rail? Or?
No, it's like where you ride the trains. This is the one you like, where you shoot the switching things.
Yeah, that was on a rail, right? I think rail.
Oh yeah, no,
rail.
it's called on a rail. You're right, exactly.
I would have to actually go to the power up. There we go.
Oh, power up.
Oh yeah, okay, power up. Yeah, so that was
where
the big boss fight is, right? And
Big
you have to go down and power up the thing, and then you electrocute him and all that stuff. Yeah.
So of all of the stuff that was thrown away, and I have plenty of work that was thrown away for Half-Life 1, for some reason that level just stuck.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up shipping it with that big area where the trains, or where the track switches, was pretty much exactly as I started with it, which I think back now is kind of magical.
So one of the to Brett's point, and that's an interesting example, to Brett's point, as far as like the sort of disparate, level designers all working, and this was my experience back when I was doing level design as well, where in those days, because we did talk a lot about in this series about level design in that era where we were very much a one-stop shop, right? Where we were building the the blockout meshes for the worlds and the architecture. We were getting textures from probably somebody else most of the time, but most of the thrust of the the vision behind the level was coming from a single source. These days it's a lot more complicated, obviously for various reasons, for the kind of big shooters. But how did you, seeing that you were the thrust of that stuff, how did you start? Was it coming from ideas that you and Marc were talking about, or was it just, what was your process? Or was it very, kind of organic and haphazard, or what did you guys have? Because you knew you were in a research facility, right, and stuff, but as Marc said, everyone kind of had their own ideas, right? So it's kind of trying to find a way to put all those ideas together.
Well, yeah, there were different threads of work going on at the same time. Steve Bond working on the AI system, the navigation system for the creatures. There were people designing some of the creatures. I think that the design of the creatures was rooted in the design of Zen, as well as the humans. And so when the AI started coming together, it was easier to form the levels to accommodate those creatures. So I think that's probably why a lot of our stuff was thrown away. The first time we were running kind of a little bit haphazard, doing our own things as you describe, while AIs were getting developed and while engine technology and animation technology was getting developed, we were kind of floating on a little bit, being a little divergent. But later on, when we realized that we'd missed a deadline and we had to ship the game within 12 months, we started getting a bit more concerted about it. I remember our sound designer, Kelly Bailey, we would get together with little groups, like 2 or 3. John Guthrie, me, Kelly would sit down and kind of figure out a broad stroke path through a map. Kelly would draw this nice isometric kind of drawing out of, I think it was coal. I had these kind of coal crayons that he would do this big sketch, this isometric sketch of what the player path could be, and they'd be just like stick figures and stuff. But we kind of got some semblance of structure from those, and then kind of interpreted those into maps. By that point, we knew the sequence of the maps and which weapons and which creatures were going to be in there. So you're right, though. It was very much more like one level designer could come up with an idea, build it, and test it within a day or two without involving too many other people, where nowadays that just never happens.
It's impossible, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that we talked a lot about as we played, and that I've always loved about the game, which it's been interesting talking to you and Marc about this, because, and I should have probably known from my own days in this similar era, that each level had a really ended up having, I think, a pretty memorable theme or shtick about it, that you're like, oh, that's the one with the big tentacle monster, or that's the one with the gargantuan, or that's the one on the track where and or that's the one on the cliffside, and it's really memorable for that reason, or even just day one, right, the opening. But then, you kind of, if you think about it, it's like, well, that was probably just every designer coming up with their own ideas, that were kind of loosely in a research facility. And something that I thought, and this is kind of my question, is something that I always felt playing the game was really well thought through and planned, that every level had its own identity that was very, very memorable, because a lot of games in that era, that wasn't the case, right? It was a lot of corridor hall crawls, very linear and kind of sameness in the levels themselves. But this was a pretty memorable set of levels. And so was that something that was planned, or was that just kind of like every level designer came up with their own ideas and they happened to work together? Marc also talked about this moment, maybe you're talking about with this 12 months to ship kind of moment, where you guys kind of had to take a step back at one point and reassess everything and kind of make sure that you were shipping the game that you really wanted to ship. And so how did you guys come up with those identities for the levels, or was it really just from each individual?
I think we had, when we did pass that point where we realized we had competition, and we had kind of the results that we had up to that point were quite scattered, and we needed to come together, and we needed to have more of a cohesive product. We past that point, we got a lot more structured in how we were doing the work, rather than kind of everybody on their own schedule. I remember the day that I think this was soon after we started that death march that actually it was Kelly, because Kelly was the guy. Kelly Bailey is the sound designer. He was kind of one of the guys who was pulling everyone together and getting everybody in shape to ship. He said one morning that, okay, everybody has to get in by 11 o'clock. You can't get in later than by 11 a.m. And I thought that was so funny that you had to actually have a mandate that everyone has to get in by 11 o'clock. But I think what happened is we kind of shifted gears where people were working very long hours. We were getting almost competitive with one another, where John Guthrie would come up with a particularly ingenious use of a mechanic that all of us already knew, but we hadn't thought about how to use it that way. And it would inspire us to say, okay, well, if he's done that, I'm going to have to use another mechanic in some obscure way to come up with something else that's interesting so I don't look bad. And there were like five of us doing the same thing, where we just started getting pretty competitive with one another.
Yeah.
Started stealing each other's ideas and then not admitting that we stole them.
I mean, that's funny. It makes me think of, I'm trying to remember what game we talked about this in. It might have been Fallout, but where you sort of had a scene going on, right? I mean, you had this like scene of level designers where you're all kind of competing and stuff like that, and kind of fighting with each other to get to the like, I want to be the best thing that shows this week or whatever.
I think there was competition between us, but there was also a lot of inspiration, and we were all so passionate about trying to beat off the competition, because we knew every so often we saw the latest features and demos from Sin.
Oh, Sin. Okay, I was trying to think who your competition might have been. Yeah, so Sin, Daikatana. Who else at that time?
Quake 2 as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And we just thought, wow, so this is basically living or dying, because this is our first our first product as a company. So every single one of us wanted to make damn sure that we had the best chance that we did to beat the competition.
Sure.
And so we just got really aggressive. We started. We didn't want to have long stretches of the game where you didn't encounter something new. We didn't want to have long stretches of the game where people would just quit playing because they were bored. So we just filled as much of the game as we could with as much density as we could. And because we didn't want to just do the same thing over and over, that meant we had to really innovate, and we had to really differentiate the areas of the game to be slightly unique.
Yeah, I mean, your guys' that's a good point.
Marc, call it paranoia. You could probably call it passion. A little bit of terror.
Yeah.
I mean, we were legitimately concerned. I remember emails that went back that went out back in the day saying we were trying to match Sin feature for feature. So as soon as they got masked textures, like handrails that you didn't have to build every brush, it would just, you just put the picture there.
Yeah.
Texture there. We thought, okay, well, we need masked textures. And then we also thought, okay, we're going to put some blood splats in. And then suddenly we saw an article that Sin has blood splats as well. And then we're just thinking, oh, crap. So we have to keep going. We have to keep innovating. We have to keep creating more and more and more gameplay and more density so that we compete favorably with our competition. And it was, I guess it was a mixture of all of those things.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So it was both a scene inside the building, like where you had all these level designers competing against one another, but then also technically competing against basically other id licensees.
Yep, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's a really fantastic and interesting time.
And back in those days, we didn't have so much visibility into everyone's processes. We had plan files, but that's basically where people would just boast about things. But just imagine the paranoia of not knowing anything, not knowing enough about your competition, but knowing that you needed to beat them. So you just kind of overcompensate and you just overwork and you add as much as you can. And it was a great thing because it created a lot of intensity and it kept us working 18-hour days. And
it was basically a Quake engine licensee Cold War.
Yeah. And you know what? It felt exactly like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about paranoia and like trying to one-up the other guys.
Terror.
Yeah, I think about
Yeah. Because I mean, we don't want to put all of that effort in only for reviews to come out and say, well, Half-Life doesn't even have blood splats on them.
Yeah, man. But talk about a company being forged. Yeah, I mean, you're adding some color to what Marc was also saying as far as the stakes, for you guys. An unknown company, a bunch of not yet known folks, and just competition being out there, and id licensees were there. They were popping up all the time, in that era. So it was definitely, I remember that, man. That's so. This is a good segue actually to the next, I think, topic or question, series of questions. And really, what we talked a lot about, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. All that happens. You guys, kill yourselves, blood, sweat, and tears to get through this. And I read a quote early in our series on Half-Life that I think was from Gabe, where he was saying, basically, your guys' goal, kind of from a vision perspective, was to build a cohesive. I'm butchering the quote. This isn't an exact quote, but to build a cohesive, connected, real sense of place in a world. And yes, there was a lot of competition out there, but I think one of the things that really wowed, obviously, people about Half-Life was its connected world, its cohesive world, its sense of place, like that demo that Brett and I talked a lot about. We talked about with Marc as well, as, just the demo alone. And Marc relayed some of the stories about your guys' reaction to everyone else's reaction to the demo once it came out, and kind of probably how happy you were and excited. But you also know that, the chips were stacked then, you had to really deliver. But yes, Sin had some of that. Quake had its own thing going on, but no game had this sort of cohesive sense of a place like Black Mesa, and then the connectedness of it, where you could go back and forth between levels. That was also like a semi-revolutionary notion. So, could you talk about any of that vision, or how you guys talked about that, and how you achieved that sense of place? Because it really was a convincing thing for the time.
I am trying to think back to if how that might have evolved, because I know that we had the level transition technology was all new as well.
Yeah.
But I don't recall. I know that Jay Stelly started working on it, but I don't recall the conversation that led to that piece of technology being built. All I remember was that we started, part of the culture, it started emerging that we wanted to do things slightly differently, because we kind of thought that some of the conventions of the time were a little bit hokey and could be improved upon. One of them was taking the character out of, or taking control from the character or anything like that to tell a story.
Yeah.
But we knew we wanted to tell a story. We just didn't want the character to kind of lose immersion when the story was told. So that kind of led to some of the decisions to create a scripted sequence, which was a story that was unraveling in front of you, and you could move around at the same time or interrupt the actors and stuff like that. And I think probably the same exact desire to have a contiguous experience where you had complete control over your character at any time. Probably that also means walking backwards and forwards.
Yeah, right.
Regardless of, I do. I'm starting to get some memories now. This is like, you have to forgive me for being.
No, we're putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I do remember in the very, very, very early days, we had levels that were disconnected, and we had these ridiculous doors that we would say, okay, well, this is where you start the level from, and this is where you end the level. And they would always be doors, and we thought, well, this is just really restrictive, and there are certain things we want to do that I'm not just always going to end with a door or like the level end teleport or whatever it's going to be. So the only thing we could do was to create transitions that you can move freely back and forth from.
I mean, that's really funny. I mean, I can remember even as late as 2002, 3, 4, or whatever, when we licensed an Unreal engine for Republic Commando, things like even carrying inventory between levels were things that we had to implement. I don't know if that was the same with the Quake engine. I suspect it probably was. Yeah. People talk about engines today, and there's a lot of kind of misunderstanding about like what an engine gives you, and of course it has changed and it depends on the engine. Like there's a million variables that go into that, but I can definitely, I mean, you're talking about this and I'm like, oh yeah, these are all things that they would have had to build and figure out, while somebody else might have been figuring out the same problem, and it just never made its way back into the central technology.
I mean, I think save load was a really big deal back then. It's completely taken for granted now, but being able to quick save and quick load and have all of your enemies be in exactly the same spot in the same state and everything like that was actually a really huge amount of work that went hand in hand to, well, it had to be done before you could just walk across an invisible transition space. That was just an extraordinary amount of work, actually.
Right. So, like, with that, like, how was I mean, if we can get into maybe a little bit deeper, like, level design kind of talk when it comes to those transitions and the map and flow of that stuff, how did you guys plan through that stuff? And was it just sort of the sort of small groups that you mentioned that were kind of iterating quickly, and you guys were just iterating over and over again, or was there, like, how do you plan that stuff? Because some of those levels, I'm trying to look at. I have a page here where it shows some of the other levels that you worked on. Alien Research Lab, the processing plant level, which also, did you work on that one? Do you remember?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, which is also a pretty complicated level. I mean, just the other thing that I don't, and we didn't play Quake during this series, so I don't have as good a memory from those days. But I don't remember the interconnectedness and kind of like just the sort of, not the puzzle aspect, but just the way the level flows, basically, right? The flow of the level and how it's the logic of the level. There's some really pretty complicated stuff there. And one of the other things I mentioned from a level design perspective in some of the previous episodes is this concept of presenting the player with essentially the gate or the task at hand, right? And some of the levels do it better than others in Half-Life, even early in the level, and then you spend the whole level basically unraveling that and opening the doors or flipping the switches or whatever you need to do, and then finally come upon that final switch. It takes a lot of planning, or I guess a lot of iteration. So, like, what was your guys' like level design process to go through that stuff? And I know you did a lot of play testing probably as well. We talked about that with Marc and such, but
yeah, we did do a lot of play testing. The levels were mainly, they ended up complicated, but they used a fairly simple set of tools, and I think that was because the tool set was simple, that allowed us to create complexity fairly quickly. I don't even know if that makes any sense, but what you do is if you take a simple set of 4 or 5 mechanics, like a rotating thing and a like a laterally moving thing, and then like a moving walkway. You can have so many different interactions of those different elements. Like you can just multiply 2 by 2 by 2, and then you suddenly get a lot of variants of those. And because levels were so simple back then, you could start with the goal, and then you could say, oh, the goal is we're going to have... I'll just talk about the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt room. Yeah, the residue processing, I think it was called.
Yeah.
We suddenly had rotating things that we never had before, and we had... I remember Jay first created those conveyor belts where it was just basically a texture which had a characteristic to it. And he said, well, now you can get pushed along from left to right, so go and use this. Okay, well, that's an incredibly simple concept. But if you layer it on top of rotating things and pushing things, and you already have an idea for the setting, which was this kind of industrial, kind of the backside of Black Mesa that no one's supposed to see because it's just kind of processing all of the garbage and waste. You have a pretty open book as far as designs to put the player through. And if you do rely on a few... we always relied on a few rule sets, which is you can't confuse... Like the first thing that you can't do with a player is confuse them. They should be able to see where they want to go. They just have to figure out how to do it. You don't want a player to come into a place and say, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. So we did rely on a few rule sets for that.
Yeah.
Just up front, which pretty much solves a lot of problems up front. We got to those in a very tiring way by playtesting, and then people getting lost or confused, and then we go, okay, well, let's refine our rule set a little bit. So we always had to do what you actually picked up on, which was show the player the puzzle clearly, and then let them figure it out. And you just add one layer after another layer after another layer of complexity, or some diversions or redirections, and then eventually you get a fairly complex puzzle, but using simple mechanics. So we would probably we would have a mixture of banging a few heads together and saying, okay, well, this is kind of a complex area, like the tentacle area is pretty complicated. How can we bring several maps together, which is kind of this one big puzzle of turning the rocket on and burning the tentacle. So those did take a lot more planning. The residue processing stuff was really, really easy because it was just a matter of, okay, you have rotating things. All right, so that's probably a cylindrical vat. You have things that push you around, so those are going to be moving walkways, conveyor belts. Then you have stamping things, so those are going to be pistons. And it's like, okay, well, build an interesting flow out of these things so the player doesn't get stuck. In fact, a lot of those maps relied on player inertia, so you don't really want to stop the player ever.
Yeah.
So you don't want to make them too complicated. You just have to have the areas big enough that when the player can see far enough and they're moving at a certain speed, they can react in time, rather than falling off and having to start again and falling off and having to start again.
Yeah, and how much was... I feel like a lot of the stories that you and Marc have been saying about Half-Life have really... I mean, I guess, how has it defined the culture of Valve in a way, because I feel like constant iteration, not being afraid to iterate and be honest with playtesting feedback, but also going with your gut as well, as Marc talked a lot about. But I mean, is that really... I feel like a lot of these stories are kind of what culturally seems to have really helped define Valve. Is that really the case still today? Is that really true? I mean, you guys haven't changed the way you work that much, probably.
Well, I think a fair amount has changed since those days, simply because they had to with the scale of the company and the complexity of technology. But I think there are several. Actually, there are still quite a few
like spiritual,
culturally significant, and procedurally significant. We we were drilled, or it was drilled into us, the playtesting. That playtesting was like number one.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. There are so many talented or creative people in the company that you're going to have a ton of disagreements, and nobody's going to be right all the time. And our arbitration was always playtesting and exhaustive playtesting, and not just playtesting internally, but externally too. That is still central to game development at Valve. I think also allowing people a certain level of autonomy is also something we learned early in the day, because that allows people to express themselves and kind of innovate and feel responsible for their own work. For the whole history of Valve that I can think of, we've wanted people to be responsible for their own work. So not only do they feel happy when it's done, they feel proud of what they've achieved, but they also see things through because they're more attached to what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they pour more emotion into it, more passion into it, and more discipline into it. There are certain cultural things that have stood the test of time that came out of from Half-Life's development, kind of organically. Just, I think, out of that desire to do the best possible work that we could do, and not get beaten by the competition, which was just like this constant shadow over us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think shifting gears a little bit, one area that I want to hit while you're on, because we do have you, even though Brett and I didn't for the podcast, we just played through the campaign, so we didn't play any multiplayer, but you do have a lot of multiplayer stuff, under your belt as well. And I don't know if there's a specific Half-Life map or maps to talk about, or even just talking about Gold Rush or something like that. But how can you talk? I think the audience would be interested to hear some of the differences between, in my opinion, having done some of both as well, like pretty drastic differences between kind of level design mentality behind, single player and multiplayer. So like what are some of the big differences for you between the level design tasks of those two different experiences? I know it's a big topic, but
it is, yeah. It's something I really like, though. Multiplayer, in my mind, single player experiences are very, very finicky. They're very, they take a lot more attention to detail. They take a lot more. When I think about single player versus multiplayer, I think about single player is you have to work for every second of environment for the player. Like you just have to put in so much time and effort for every passing moment that happens.
Meticulous.
I mean, it really is, because you want it to be watertight and you want it to go a certain way. The way that the game was designed, you want it to go that way, and usually it's a bug if it goes the wrong way. But with multiplayer, you're basically setting up a set of rules and you're telling everybody to go and improvise and make their own fun. And to me, it's enjoyable in a different way, because you're basically creating a playing field and doing a set of rules, and then so many crazy things can come out of those. It's so much more chaotic that I enjoy playing that a lot more, because it's more you get a lot more repetition out of it, and for the amount of time you put into development, you get times 100 hours back. Where in single player, you're fighting for every minute of experience, which is its own. It's just different. It's also very enjoyable. It feels very good to be able to create an experience like that, because you have utter control over it. So you can craft a single player experience. At least in my experience, you can craft a single player experience a lot closer than you can multiplayer.
Yeah.
One of the things I was curious about, and this is shifting gears a little bit, or shifting tracks, as it were.
Oh boy.
Is that one of the things we haven't talked a lot about, at least recently, is the interaction between sort of programmers. Of course, that's my discipline, and level designers. What was it like? Like, how did that go? You've talked a little bit of like, well, we need this technology or that technology for competitiveness. But were there like back and forth of like a programmer coming to you and saying, "Oh, I have this idea. We can do this thing. Can you do anything with it?" versus you going and saying, "Oh, it'd be really cool if I could do this thing. Can you do that?" Like, can you think of any examples of those sorts of things?
There's always both of those. If you're talking about Half-Life still,
I mean, it's fine. It's fine to branch out a bit if you have other better examples that are more recent.
Yeah, so there are. I guess I can think of a good illustration of where there would be both ways of that would be in Half-Life 2 when I was sitting in a room with 2 programmers and 2 level designers, and we were working on the Street War section of the game, where the 2 programmers were working on. I don't even remember if this even shipped, but early on in the game, you could have a group of 4 or 5 of these citizens following you around, and you could tell them to just wait here or go over there. You could basically command them to do what you wanted to do. So when they were working on that, because they thought that was pretty cool. They would then come to us and they would say, "Okay, what can you do with this? Can you create scenarios that take advantage of this technology?" And then we would go and create track for that and experiences for that. And on the other side of things, John Guthrie and I would be working on breaking some of the features that the programmers were made because we wanted to use them a certain way. And then we would go to the programmers who say, "Hey, if only this thing worked slightly differently, we'd be able to do these really cool things with them." And they'd say, "Oh yeah, we'll go do that work for you," because we would illustrate it with some kind of crazy hack that really annoyed them. And programmers hate it when level designers misuse their tools or they use.
We are weirdly aesthetically driven programmers, I will tell you.
Because they have this image or they have this vision of how they want their stuff to work.
We're seeking a Borg-like purity.
Exactly.
That is so true, Brett. Yeah, I was the one that would do that to Brett, and it's still just true today, right? Where it's like, level designers, what are you doing with this tech? You're not supposed to be doing that. It's horrible.
You can't pass a negative number to the. Oh my god!
Exactly. Yeah. So I see it as a tribute to the work programmer. If you can use their work in ways they never intended.
Stretch it. Yeah.
So we were in really small groups. I mean, we had for Half-Life 2, we had groups of 4 to 6, all working together really closely, and it was usually a mixture of programmers, level designers, artists, all kind of asking things of each other randomly, back and forth.
Yeah, that's good if you can find a chemistry that works. Valve isn't the only company that's done this. I know EA talked about doing this at one point. They made a big deal about it. Like they had pods or something like that. I don't even remember the term, but they had like little groups the same way. But that always happens. You put together these little teams to address individual issues or levels or what have you. And depending on the makeup of that group, you might get some real magic out of it. So I was just kind of curious, what kind of things that were in your own personal history as far as that goes.
Yeah, and then we, I don't know, a few more questions. We try to keep it around an hour just for to be respectful of your time and stuff. But one other interesting thing I wanted to ask that is pretty unique with I think a lot of the guests we've had on is you've had a good long career. You've been at one place the whole time, and I guess, I mean, though you can correct me if I'm wrong, you've been working essentially in this similar or same discipline that whole time. And how have you felt it has evolved, level design specifically as a discipline for you and as a role? How has it evolved over time? And how have you kept it interesting for yourself and fresh, and is it just the projects that are coming, down that are kind of keeping you, invested and excited? Is it just the culture of the company, or how is that? I mean, 21 years you said, right? So it's
at Valve, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a really rare and healthy and cool thing, but it's so rare that I just wanted to hear if you had any thoughts on how it's changed for you over such a long time, in one job and one company.
Well, it's definitely become less. So it's become a lot more complicated a job to pull off. So you're definitely relying more and more on the people around you than say 20 years ago, where I think I built what was that? A multiplayer game where you'd shoot people from towers. Anyway, yeah, I would come up with a map and I would build it in 3 days and it would be playtesting. Like these days, the games and the technology are so much more complicated that I work with a lot more people to produce the same kind of result.
Yeah.
And that by itself is really, it really gives me a lot of energy, because I'm kind of feeding off the people around me and all of their creativity and all of their input. And that's always really exciting I've always really needed that kind of. Milo was that, my brother was that guy in Final Doom, creating all of these things that were really inspirational. Because in a vacuum, I don't think I perform as well in a vacuum. So having more people around is far more interesting. We keep things fresh at Valve. If I look back at 21 years, I've worked on things as diverse as Portal, Left 4 Dead, Team Fortress, Half-Life, and stuff like that. And it's very diverse, so that keeps things interesting. The people.
Well, and you've shifted from that very competitive mindset, because it only took one person to do a thing. You could naturally be competitive with the other individuals around you, and you've shifted to this much more collaborative, environment where it's like, well, you need to draw on the skills from these other people in order just to make your number of people needed per minute, is ridiculously higher than it was 20 years ago, and so now you have to draw on those other people, but you can at the same time draw their passions and interests and input and things like that. That's fun.
Yeah, I think you end up with a far more interesting product when you have that amount of creativity and that amount of passion going into something. But as far as 21 years, I bet you there are a ton of people out there that have had a career that long. It might have been spread around a couple of different companies, which maybe that makes it interesting because you have to learn new cultures and stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, the freshness and the interest lies it's all about the products and the people you're working with.
Yeah.
The products should change, but the people you're working with don't have to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's been 21 years for me, and moved around. I've been lucky to not have to move around too often. But you're relearning studio cultures every time you move, and the people do change when you move, for the most part.
That must be a challenge.
It is. It's a different layer. You're adding into the whole equation, and then the products change as well, right? And so, it's an extra thing. But as far as it is rare in our industry to have someone stay at a company for their whole time. So it's just
Valve has been really good. I mean, it's a great company. It feels to me like a family, and it treats its people really well. The people there are just really ambitious, and I think we hire people who work really well with our culture, and I think that's a really good thing, because we say no to a lot of people who are really qualified but maybe won't fit the culture. And I think if you retain that culture that you're comfortable with, there's no reason to leave. And also the company's been incredibly stable, obviously financially. So I think a lot of people they move companies not because they want to, but because something outside of their control has changed, where they can't stay. So it's just been a very stable place to be.
Yeah, and that's interesting. It's a good point that we won't have time to talk about now, I think, but in any depth. But Brett and I haven't actually talked that much about it, and we haven't asked other guests about really culture. It's something that we talk about even at 343 today, and often, and it's something that I think I guess I'll say. I think a lot of studios take it for granted, that it's not something to foster and to define and to work on, and to, I think everyone has best intentions that they want to do that, but when you're on a deadline, or you're shipping, or you're dealing with sort of the realities of just game development, I feel like it's one of those things that maybe gets forgotten about too often, and then it kind of sneaks up on you eventually, and you realize your culture needs work in some way, and it's cool to hear that Valve has really seems to have prioritized that and make sure that, like you said, they're bringing in people that fit the culture, rather than, I think what the typical thing is you bring in people that are qualified, and then
fill a slot, right?
Yeah, and then it kind of ends up impacting the culture in unexpected ways that you may not even know about for years. Where you kind of get this sort of combination of cultures, and they're all kind of mushed together, and you have to figure it out kind of in a post-mortem kind of way, and that's challenging as well, in a whole different way.
But at the same time, it's kind of funny because Valve really grew up by bringing in lots of individuals. Because it was a time where you had so many individuals, right? I mean, especially in things like the mod culture, where there was no common culture except maybe that competitiveness that we've addressed. So I don't know. It's really interesting that the culture that evolved out of that has become I don't know, something that could sustain one person for 20 years. Yeah.
That's very different. Yeah, and I credit Gabe with the success of the culture, because he was always I think having had been at Microsoft for 13 years before he started Valve, there was a number of things that he really wanted to improve upon, and he was really particular about those things, about being very visibly supportive to all of his employees, and I think that created a culture of caring and of becoming responsible for one's own happiness within the company, rather than feeling like it was somebody else's responsibility or somebody else was going to manage your happiness. Like it definitely created a culture of responsibility and a culture of not just turning your back on other people's problems and concerns and issues and stuff. So yeah, it feels family-like.
That's cool.
Well, just like Black Mesa, it became this huge interconnected mess, and that's kind of
that's a bit exactly like that.
It's quite wonderful. There aren't a lot of companies even that have been around. Companies come and go, they get acquired, whatever, cultures change, and it is. I mean, I think Valve is one of those a handful of companies that you really look to and say, wow, this company has really done it, and they've done it for a long time, and so it's been really great to kind of peer into not only the game, and the particular kind of game that kicked it all off, but also to talk with a couple of you and get a sense of what it's like to work there both then and now. So
yeah,
it's been really great.
Marc, I thought, made a fun analogy because we were talking a lot about fiction with him, obviously, right, coming from a writing perspective, and Black Mesa and sort of the science theme of the game, which was very different from a lot of the other kind of Space Marine stuff out there at the time, which was also a differentiator in my opinion. But just he made the fun analogy where Black Mesa was this sort of experimental science facility, and he kind of equated Valve in that era of also kind of being this grand experiment, and you guys were all kind of just dabbling in these sort of science experiments in your own disciplines, and how it kind of obviously succeeded, and I just thought that was
that's pretty interesting. Yeah,
fun kind of correlation between the.
I haven't thought of it that way, but I can see what he's talking about.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Dario, for being on. We really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure and delight to have somebody such a veteran level designer on, and thanks for relaying your stories on Half-Life. It's been a treat.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's definitely interesting and fun to talk to you guys. I'll definitely look you guys up after this is done. From what you're saying, it seems like we have a lot of things in common, going back 20 years. So
yeah, similar era. So I'm sure a lot of war stories to swap on this stuff. So
yeah, I'll be out in the Seattle area in I don't know, a few weeks' time. Maybe the three of us can go grab a drink.
Oh yeah, that'd be fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. That would be really great. I'd love that.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Dario, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Welcome back from the break. That was really cool to kind of dig into one particular discipline at a particular time, and somebody who really overlaps so much with you, and was in the same discipline. Obviously, I mean it was kind of interesting to hear that particular perspective.
Yeah, and I think specifically he no, it wasn't really planned per se. I mean, Dario was just the one that kind of answered the call to come on, really. But to get a perspective of someone coming from the modding community into level design, right? Because that was in that era, that was a very common, as you mentioned with Chris Klie, that was a very common way to do it, but it wasn't the only way.
Right.
But
yeah, I mean, even at
nice
Bethesda, Bethesda has a programmer who came from the mod community, in Brian Robb, who does a lot of combat-oriented stuff, and he's kind of a programmer, which is even rarer, I think, to kind of come straight from the mod community. It depends on what's available to modders, I guess, and that's one of the things we'll talk about as part of the feedback stuff. I also wanted to call out to John Webb, who a while back sent us email about sort of community involvement in games and mostly post-release, like, fan translations and, total reskins, or totally, taking a game and taking everything in it, and what do we call them? Total conversions, something like that, I think is what they called them in the day. A handful of different sort of community, involved stuff. But I think bringing in modders from the community to kind of form the basis of your level design crew is kind of part of that, in a way. And Valve was kind of different that way. So.
And Valve has, I mean, we asked this a little bit, but we didn't get into it with any depth. But that's been a big part of Valve's strategy for their whole entire existence, right? Like Team Fortress Classic was a mod for Quake 1 that they hired some of the folks.
DotA? Are they DotA?
Yeah. Okay. DotA 2, they hired IceFrog.
IceFrog, yep.
And Portal, right? Portal was
of course, a student
project from
Narbacular
DigiPen.
drop. Yep.
Yeah. So they look for themes, of kind of interesting community centric or mod centric or grassroots centric stuff.
It's also, it's continued even today. I mean, certainly beyond kind of Steam,
Counterstrike,
which is, I was going to say, like, they incorporate fan made hats and skins and.
Oh yeah, they're leading
so
as far as
it continues to be a huge thing as far as that goes.
Yeah, and it's a
various kind of workshop, which was the thing that Bethesda kind of tried to pioneer a little bit, but so trying to find ways to bring in creators who are not in the games industry, but who do this in their spare time or want to be in the industry maybe someday. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why people do mods.
We keep an eye on Forge, right? Forge users for us.
Yeah,
like that's a big part of our community too. And some of the standouts there, both and for Halo, we will actually put Forge maps into our playlists that are coming from. Oh, there's June. Into the community, from the community, and then occasionally we'll even bring some of those people into the studio. So. Yeah.
Yep. No, I mean it's. I mean, I think that they kind of, I mean, they were in a position to be able to be a vanguard, but I say that, and at the same time, when they started out, they were sort of a vanguard.
Oh, yeah.
So it is a really interesting company culture, and it's something that we certainly touched on. I'm
glad that topic came up with Dario. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, no, really, really terrific. And Valve is one of those companies, that we put on this huge pedestal, rightly or wrongly, and probably mostly rightly, because they've been around doing their thing for a long time, and they've really changed the industry multiple times. At the very least with Half-Life and Steam itself, but there's probably individual pieces, other games or pieces that you could look in like, oh, that's pretty transformative in and of itself. Very clever and interesting company, and someday I'll be out in Seattle and maybe I'll talk to them. So we'll see how that goes. All right, so let's put that to bed for a little while and switch to a little reader feedback. After that, we're going to talk about what next, briefly, because we actually don't know what next in a certain regard. But yeah, why don't we first go to email, and then I have some stuff, and we have some more stuff. So go.
Yeah, so from Jonathan DeLuca, he says, "Hey lads, excellent shows all."
Before you read it, you remember Jonathan DeLuca? He sent us email about music in Colossus or.
Oh Eco. Yeah. I thought the name was rang a bell. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mention that before we discussed
Yeah.
his email. So
Okay, yeah, no, I know who he is. Yeah, yep. So excellent show as always. I was thinking, ... You've been warned, in parentheses. I compose and record my own music. I love things of a creative nature in general, and I obviously love video games. I have no intention of becoming a game developer in any professional sense, but I wouldn't mind being able to make something cool for myself in Unreal or Unity or any other available engine for that matter. Realistically, if I dedicated an hour of a day or one of my days off each week in Unity or Unreal, how long until I could start realistically making something worthwhile for myself? Honestly, even if it was just something equal to one small dungeon in Zelda or one level in an FPS, am I looking at months, years, half a decade? Assuming I put the time in daily or weekly, how lofty of a goal is that? Just curious what your thoughts are on that. Do you want to stop? Here's a two-part. You want to do that first?
Yeah, let's start there and go to the next part. Yeah, I mean, my thinking about that is, I used to think so you kind of, over your career, you kind of evolve on this thinking. So my thinking originally and kind of at the beginning was I can do anything. I'll just dive in and do it. And then in my middle of my career, I got very oh, you need all this infrastructure and you really need to plan and figure out what you're going to do, and that takes time, and you've got this huge team and whatever, and etc. And now I'm out the other end and I'm you know what, you can do whatever. Spend time every day, and it's more important just to spend time every day,
totally,
than to I'll take as an example not Transistor, SuperGiant Games, Bastion. So Bastion, their first game from SuperGiant, which is Greg Kasavin, and I'm going to have to look up the CEO's name.
His name's escaping me.
It's escaping me. But they basically, that team started just putting in things they liked. I like this in a game, I like that in a game. And they just kind of started pushing those things into this game that they made that ended up doing extremely well for them. And my feeling, and they ended up cutting things from that. They're I really like this in a game, but it doesn't fit, with our Amir Rao. It doesn't fit with our kind of the other stuff that we're doing. They had this whole huge gardening component or whatever. Maybe they put that in another game someday because they love gardening. But from my perspective now, it's more about spend the time. You'll get every day. You'll get better. There's this 10,000 hours to be a master of a thing, thing that's out there. And they talk about it okay, well, there's either 0 or there's 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
And really, it's at 0 hours, you're terrible. And at 1 hour, you're a little bit less terrible. And at 2 hours, you're a little bit less terrible. And by 1,000 hours, well, wow, you're a long way from terrible. And I think it's way more important to just go ahead and do it every day.
Yeah.
Like you would do anything.
Yeah, I think it's well said. I think it's hard to answer Jonathan's question kind of to the week or something like that. Because it really depends on what, so I don't really know how to answer this effectively, to be honest, because it really depends on so many things. And I definitely overthink and overdesign most of my things that I do, so I'll overthink it. I could spend a whole hour kind of talking about this question, to be honest, and trying to help Jonathan answer his question. But I totally agree with Brett, especially because this is something that you're, Jonathan, thinking about doing just on your own for fun. The main thing I would say, because I also have gone through ebbs and flows of an opinion on this question, as Brett has over my career, I feel just do it, just have fun, just do something for fun and spend the time on it that you have. And like Brett says, chip away at it. It will get better. You're going to throw a lot of it away. Yep. And you'll probably rebuild it. But, after a month or so, you'll probably have something that you'll be pretty proud of. And as long as you had fun making it, that's, I think, going to be good enough for you. I think that'll be something that'll keep you. And then you'll want to probably do another thing, Yeah,
it's all win at that point. I mean, it's like the old thing about where a pottery class, they split it into two, and one half they said, we're going to grade you on the final product. one final project that you give us. One thing. You're going to make one thing that you're going to give to us. And the other half of the class, they say, we're going to grade you on the amount of things that you make. And
wait, this is a real class? What is this?
This is a real thing. This actually happened, but it's also used as kind of a metaphor for creativity.
Philosophy, yeah.
And the people who are given the, like, make a million things, like, make as many things as you can in 3 months or 6 months or whatever the number is. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who, at the end, even though they're making a million things and they're all just throwaway and we don't care, end up making better, more interesting things than the people who are making one thing.
Yeah. That's really cool.
I mean, one of the really interesting things, and we were talking to Dario about this, is that you could make a level in a day and test it.
Yeah.
And I think that there's still a real energy to that. I've actually occasionally done YouTube things or Twitch things where I've gone and, like, I programmed asteroids in an hour. Here's asteroids in an hour. Here's, I don't know.
Oh, I didn't know you did that.
Yeah, I did a couple of Space Invaders. I did Breakout, maybe.
Just from scratch?
Just from scratch. I had a few, like, simple rendering things that I had written would just share, but they were really minimal. And some vector math. But it was basically like, I have very little. I'm just going to jump in and write this classic game. Pong. The first one I did was Pong. Like, jump in. Here's the thing. And, like, oh, you can move it. And the other guy can move it. And those, I don't know, those aren't keys or mouse or whatever. And just jamming on doing a few of those really quickly in only an hour was really kind of freeing. Like, and at the end of the hour, I'd just say, okay, well, I've got a bug in Breakout. Oh, that'd take me a while. I don't know what's going on, but I'm done. It's mostly Breakout. There's some issues there. And at that point, you can start playing. Like, I did a variant of Asteroids at one point, which you could put images into the directory. I called it Picturoids. You could just take pictures and put it in there, and it would break the pictures into asteroids. And you could go and shoot them. And as you shot them, they would reappear as the picture. And when you got all the asteroids, you'd have the picture that you had. And they'd be alpha, and they'd fade up, and it's just a dumb, fun thing to do.
Yeah, well, I think advice and lesson that I would throw in there to piggyback off what you're saying for Jonathan is the one advice I'd give is pick a pretty focused thing to start with, or series of things. Don't think too big. I think, especially talking to a lot of game dev students and stuff, I think one of the challenges that I even have to take my own advice on this, by the way, because like I said, I overthink and overdesign things. But, like, start small. Think, like Brett's saying with his little experiments, like, just do something, like you said, a level or even a room. You can do a lot in a room. And just
not even a Zelda dungeon, but a Zelda room.
Yeah, and then just do another one, and then do something completely, do a Metroid thing, or just completely switch it up on yourself. And before you'll know it, like Brett said, you're going to have a kind of a deck of cards of abilities, and just especially because you're not doing it for your job right now, just please have fun with it. Don't make it more than, don't try to stretch it.
We all win if you come back. I coached youth baseball for a long time. And like the win condition for youth baseball was that most of the kids come back to play baseball the next year. Yeah. It wasn't we win a lot of games. Who cares? They're 8 years old. They don't even know. The important thing was they come back and they're 9 years old and they're still playing baseball.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real thing that you want to try to achieve. Is like, not, I did an awesome thing, and I'm so excited to do the next thing. It's more like, I had fun doing this thing. I want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Okay,
so part two, we got to keep going. So this one's for Tim. He says, Tim, you've been talking about how much you enjoyed Half-Life, and it seems like you got into this game club a little bit more than normal. Not that you weren't into the other ones, but I detected a little bit more excitement. If this is true, and if we're not getting another Half-Life, couldn't you just make some Halo DLC and call it Halo Life 3? Come on, that's got to be the best idea you've heard in a while. Am I right? All jokes aside, it would be really cool if a bunch of you guys, developers, started up a fan project and passed around your work and made a spiritual successor to Half-Life, even if it was just a little thing. I get it, though. You guys are all super busy and making games can't be easy, but it would be really cool to see. Thanks for the show. P.S. If you guys make the spiritual successor to Half-Life, I'll compose the music for free. This is Jonathan. You're crazy. Yeah, I mean, the funny thing about this, it's a hilarious idea. And yes, to the first part of it, shooters are my bread and butter. Half-Life specifically is just a franchise that I've loved, and I think a lot of us love, right? But I think it's just I fall into shooters really easily, and we haven't. This was our first kind of traditional shooter we've done on the podcast, of course. And I think the other, to my excitement point, the other thing I've noticed about myself, at least for the podcast, is that I am. Subconsciously, I've been, I think, kind of taking an academic approach to the podcast where I want, like when we play Metroid or we play some other genre that I maybe haven't worked in specifically myself before, I feel an obligation to like take it pretty seriously and really like think things through from an academic perspective for the podcast. So it's not, I'm not saying that it's more like work or it feels like work. I think I'm just a little more serious about it. And with Half-Life, I guess my excitement a little bit. It's a good question because it's made me have to think about it. It just was kind of easy and comfortable and almost like, subconscious, that I could just kind of groove through it, for Half-Life specifically versus others that I, was thinking a little more heavily about. So,
yeah. Well, no, I mean, when you're talking JRPGs, you're like, I'm at sea.
Yeah,
I'm literally
exactly.
in the middle of the ocean, and I have no landmarks.
Exactly. No, that's excellent point. Yeah, those genres that I'm even less familiar with, even though I've played many different genres. Like if we were to do a sports game or something, right? Like that's
we'd
literally
both be lost.
We'd both be like, what?
Unless
so
it was baseball.
We'll get there someday. But to the other one, I mean, yeah, I know he's joking, but I'd love to do a Halo Life 3. It's just, legality of it would never be possible.
Yeah,
I mean,
it would never fly.
There's like when you work, and as I've talked about on the podcast, I'm always uncomfortable talking about modern stuff because just so the audience knows, to reiterate, like because I am currently working at a competitor's studio, I have to be careful with what I say and how I address stuff. And so I try to keep that in mind. And that's the reason why you don't have a lot of developers who work at a big studio like I do, working on side projects for other IPs because it just,
for sure.
you can't do it. It's not legal.
I mean, to a certain degree, I mean, there's two things here. I mean, one is, yes, I mean, there's all this kind of legality and like, how do you even do this? Even as fans or whatever, it's a tough thing, and it's a rare thing. I was thinking today about Shovel Knight, which is like a SNES-style platformer in the modern era.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of tried to emulate what a SNES game might be, and they kind of used that as a constraint to deliver what they were going to deliver. The hard part of Half-Life in particular is it really underlies a lot of what first-person shooters that have a narrative component do in the modern era. So it's like it's already, in a certain sense, given birth to your Halos and whatever. In a certain sense. I mean, not directly or anything. But, so there's that. And then on the other hand is like, one of the things about the original Half-Life and even Half-Life 2 is we look back at those as developers and go, so they had lots of little interesting core ideas that they explored. And Half-Life, it was like lots of individual things for the levels. In Half-Life 2, I want to say it's mostly the gravity gun, which I think they used a lot, really leaned on, something we'll talk about, I think, in the future. But, they sort of had these ideas, and they just kind of delved really deep on them, and it's hard to find that next idea. What is the next idea that makes a lot of sense for Half-Life? What is the next gameplay mechanic that makes a lot of sense for Half-Life.
Oh, I can't even imagine the discussions that they've been going through for years.
I was like, exactly. Why is there no Half-Life 3?
I can't imagine
because we haven't found the thing.
Yeah.
No, we haven't found the thing. And like Portal was its own thing. You could almost feel like Portal 2 was like a Half-Life extension because it took a lot of ideas and took them forward and had a lot of things we talked about, in terms of individual levels having their own thing in Half-Life.
Yeah, the Portal games were, they to your point, they were the thing. They had the thing. It just wasn't called Half-Life. It was just called Portal.
Exactly. And they did a different fiction and whatever, but you can totally imagine...
Or is it?
Yeah. You could totally imagine a Half-Life game that's Gordon Freeman with these new abilities. Make a portal, paint the ground in weird ways, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can imagine that thing. But, like, what's the next thing? And I have to imagine that is the thing that designers have gone to Valve to and gone like, I don't know.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
In 6 months, ask me again. And then 6 months, they ask him, and they're like, yeah, I still don't know.
Yeah. Well, and the industry has changed a lot, right? And they're not that big of a company. And so, like, mounting another game, like that on that scale would be a Herculean effort for them, too. So, yeah, who knows? Who knows, really? But yeah, Brett's right that they're going to want that thing, and then they're going to want to be confident about it, so they're going to churn through that stuff. But who knows? Who knows what will
maybe they'll find it. I mean,
I guess
I'd love to play a Half-Life 3 or a Half-Life 2 Episode 3 or whatever.
I guess, yeah. I mean, as a fan, I guess technically, we could get a few of us together and do something as fans, just like mod style on the side. Not necessarily in the Half-Life universe, or do some spiritual successor and not call it Half-Life. But I guess that's technically possible. I've had friends do that, but it just gets a little bit weird because, and not only that, but I work for Microsoft now, so it's like it's even weirder, because I'm first party. So I don't know. I guess I'm just cautious in that area. But hilarious. Halo Life 3 is a hilarious idea, Jonathan. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay, so this one is going to be a little disjointed. I haven't edited it down, but it's from Brian Taylor, who I think we've read before on the podcast. He wrote in after our Laidlaw interview last week via Twitter DM to me personally. He said, so, 2 things I had made notes about on Half-Life and thought I'd share them after hearing Laidlaw. Note 1, first person saves on cutscenes... Models and scripting in Freeman, no need to worry about camera shots. Okay, he's basically talking about, like, they didn't have to do cutscenes with Gordon Freeman as a character because they were in first person. But also leads to need of narrative explanations for getting Gordon from one point to another, like stasis between Half-Life and Half-Life 2. He never really got the feeling that breaking first person creates a stronger player-character bond, and feels like it's more of an aesthetic choice. So, also, the brief mention of modders becoming professional developers. I was thinking about how a dev with access to the source code can make changes in a way that modders who have access only to in-engine scripting and geometry, etc. can't. I think that can lead to a way more interesting kind of spatial development where you're just seeing what the hell that engine can do. He says, I never played Infernal Machine, but it sounds like that level of Tim's you talk about does that kind of stuff with the Sith engine. So, I don't know that we can really address the first one, because it's like, well, it's an aesthetic choice. It's funny because we kind of adopted it as a,
I
reason to go forward.
The big revelation was that it wasn't entirely an aesthetic choice, but it became one in the sort of legend of it. Do you know what I mean? Like... and that was the revelation for me.
From the outside looking in, it was an aesthetic choice. Like they made that decision.
I had never read that anywhere. I don't know if they had talked about it before. I don't know if we were the ones to break that news.
Oh my god, a scoop! A scoop!
We scooped
that and the Tarrasque.
But the thing is that they also carried that forward with Half-Life 2, right? So they adopted it, and in fact. Portal, they're really...
No, moving forward, it's been a thing for them.
Yeah.
As for the second point, it is true. Access to the source code gives you a lot more options.
Yeah.
but I think, and this actually sort of ties back to talking about, like, what do you do with Half-Life? It's also, I mean, for me, it's terrifying. So I'm going to, like, throw this out there. So Bethesda, after Skyrim, did a, like, company game jam. And it was not long after we shipped. And I was still in, oh my God, we have to patch this thing. We have these things to do and whatever. And I didn't participate. And part of the reason why I didn't participate is I had no freaking idea. This was an engine that could do, like, I mean, I could do anything, especially with access to it. And it's like, what do you want to do? At that point, it's like, what do I want to do that's new?
It's paralyzing.
Oh, it's so paralyzing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, really hard to come up with, like, oh, I could do this, and I want to do this thing. Because, I mean, for me, and I was in a leadership position at this point, for me, normally the things that I want to do with an engine are like, I want to do this thing to make it easier for the team to make the game.
Yeah, right.
So it's yeah, I get into a different headspace of, like, I don't know what to do. Like,
well, you shifted, yeah. I mean, once you started getting into that kind of leadership role, that's you.
But I mean, I shifted, but I was always there. I mean, even on Starfighter, it was like I talked to the level designers every day. What do you need? Yeah. What do you not have?
Yeah.
And for me, though, it was like, I want to help these people make this thing that they want to do.
Yeah.
And I've definitely gotten to a point in my career where, like, in the future, I'm like, oh man, I want to tackle a thing that really just, like, pulls stuff out of me, and I've done some stuff, internally. I say internally, like I'm a company. But I've done stuff at home, where I've built stuff, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested in playing with this idea.
Yeah.
But I need, like, now to make it a reality, I need 20 people, and I'm just I don't have 20 people.
I mean, like, one thing about the difference between the two types of modding, like, the one thing I will say about modding without the source code or just within the engine is constraints are good. And I think when you have limitations, as I think Dario was a good example, you think about, and we even talked about it with Dario. I think it's hilarious that came up about designers doing things with the engine that the programmers don't want them to.
Exactly.
But that then it just proves to them that they should do it, and so then they make it real. But that's, it's like you can do a lot with the engine you have without touching the code and really be super weird and creative. Yeah, maybe the level from Infernal Machine is a good example of that, where I was just like, what if I did this? Because you can in this engine, and you're not supposed to, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it just fit the aesthetic, I guess you could say.
Right.
But I just think those constraints are interesting.
That wasn't the thing that crashed the engine. That's what kills me,
right.
15 years on or wherever it is now. Like, that wasn't the thing that actually crashed that engine. What crashed that engine was, firing the machine gun on a modern computer.
Yeah, right. Something totally different.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I think constraints are good for modders anyway. The thing I had a source code example though that I'm forgetting now. Darn it! I think it was an id example. I feel like what I was going to use the example of is actually we have an internal hackathon that we do at 343. We've done 2 years in a row. Microsoft does it as a company, but where we just give the team a week and they can do whatever they want. And most of them use our engine, and the stuff that they come up with, and programmers are part of this, right? The stuff that they're bending and breaking our engine to do, whole different genres of games within our engine, so you can definitely do a lot of wacky stuff with it, and it is interesting to see that stuff, but they're still working within some constraints. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things I looked at back when we were at LucasArts and really actually in Starfighter in that first year was we thought we could do a RTS.
Oh yeah, totally, yeah.
In the engine, as programmers, we were like, oh, we could totally do an RTS with this, and I'm not sure that was wrong. I don't think it would have been super performant, but if I had had time, like I wanted to do a level that was like a bonus level or something like that, where you
I
could
remember.
control, like, put a thing here, choose what the thing was you're going to put there. It would have been actually sort of an early tower defense style game. In terms of, like, you would have only been able to choose from a certain number of things to put here or there. And Rich Davis actually made a sort of, like, make your own challenge thing for Jedi Starfighter, I think.
I think I remember this,
Yeah, that might have even shipped. I don't even remember. But, like, where it would basically spawn in waves of different types of enemies subject to our memory constraints. Like, okay, well, we can only have 4 different types of enemies or whatever it was. But he would spawn in mixes of those different types of enemies based on what that was. And he generated this thing that just, like, procedurally made that level. And it was kind of crazy.
Yeah. And he was bending the engine to do it.
He totally was. Yeah, that was not... I mean, even just letting players play whatever ship they wanted, or from a selection of ships that we gave them, whatever it was. I guess that's the thing that I most wrote to break an engine ever, was that, like, a week before alpha on Starfighter, I made it possible to just, like, oh yeah, the player can just fly whatever ship they want. So we added, like, maybe a Sith ship. That might have been Jedi Starfighter, but we added, like, you can just go in, you can fly the Starfighter on any level, you can fly the Nim ship on any level, and all that stuff. And that was not... Andrew Crimsey still gives me a hard time about that. So
the irresponsibility of
here we are, where, like, 2 days, like, it might have actually been a day before we were supposed to lock content. Oh yeah, you've just made this weird, impossible memory situation on any given level. Just go ahead. Just go ahead and do that one day. One day before we're supposed to lock everything down.
Good times.
Good times. I miss those times. I'm sort of in those times in a way now, but it's like I'm helping with Tacoma, which is not a systemic game so much. He has a more narrative game.
Yeah, right.
I would love to be on a systemic game where, like, up to the last minute, I could do the craziest thing with a system. So, just like, oh yeah, I'm going to throw this total wrench into how this game works. Okay, let's call it there for Brian's Twitter DM strain of stuff that he threw at me. I think I sent you one review.
Yeah, review real quick. So here from let's see, analysis and history of older games, well worthwhile, by Lucas Rizzoli.
Oh yeah, Lucas is somebody I know. So just
that's his real name.
That's his real name.
Okay.
Yep.
Listen to these two friends, game developers and lifelong game players, recount their playthroughs of important and influential games from the 90s and early 2000s. Brett and Tim share anecdotes, insights, and theories frankly and in good humor. Their stories and interviews with other developers, from directors to quality assurance, show that there's a lot to learn from and about these games, even 20 plus years later. Whether or not one plays along with the episodes, Dev Game Club is worthwhile for anyone who enjoys video games. Thank you, Lucas.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. I met Lucas at Boston's, what is it called? It's an unconference Game Loop. I think Game Loop, is the conference that they have there. So I met Lucas there a few years back. Yeah, face to face. Yeah, Lucas and I sat in on a discussion about something or other at that time. And it's I mean, that's what we try to do, obviously, is that just kind of throw stuff out there. But we will also, like, entertain anything people throw at us. You know, if you send us an email that is like, hey, why don't you just get a bunch of friends together and make Half-Life Episode 3? Okay, we'll talk about why we can or can't, or what we would do, or, you know, what have you. I mean, that's...
Oh, I have thoughts on that. I mean...
we all have thoughts.
But you'll never... Yeah.
No, I mean, one of the things... It's funny. One of the things I think about with... oh my God, have we read Lucas's email before? We might have. One of the things I think about frequently is, like, if they handed me this franchise, what would I do with this franchise? And it's usually like my favorites. Yeah, it's like, if I had Indiana Jones, what would I do with Indiana Jones? That's like one of my favorites. It's like, oh man, it would be, you couldn't fail at that game. Like, you'd have to, like, literally let him die. Like, not push a button, let him die. That is my thing about Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones, he doesn't die. He always finds a way through. And as long as you're pushing some button, you should find a way through. I mean, that's my thing about Indiana Jones. I always have a thing that I would talk about on basically any game development topic. So, keep sending them.
You can't shut them up.
Huh? You can't shut me up. Oh, my God. As much as you've tried through the years.
Speaking of, do you have a review to read?
There's been injunctions.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, the lawyers come after me, and still.
Yeah, that's why we record this on different coasts, because I have a restraining order against you.
Let's see. I've got one from Takalock, if that is your real name.
And we still have to do the contest, too.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. He says, I love listening to DGC during the work week. Being a Python dev by day and recently working on learning Unity, the insight you all provide as you play through different games is extremely valuable. Love listening, and if you ever feel like doing a different style of game, I wouldn't mind hearing you take on something from the BattleTech universe.
Interesting.
Mech games.
Yeah.
BattleTech or not, mech games are
yeah,
like,
that's a good one.
I'm not
the old PC stuff.
I was gonna say I'm not deep into mech lore, so I don't know which games are BattleTech and which are not. Mech Warrior.
Mech Warrior would be, and I know a guy. Actually, I know a couple guys.
I know some guys from Mech Assault, but Mech Warrior, I don't.
No, I'm talking Mech Warrior like back in the PC Activision days.
All right.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Those are very simmy too, right? Like we haven't done like TIE Fighter, I guess, but the old
they're
mech,
even simmier. Yeah, I was gonna say
those
they're even
suckers are like
they're not quite Steel Battalion levels, but
no, but it's like they're unforgiving,
Yeah, no.
But
that is so one of the reasons why we haven't played that.
it was the commitment, yeah.
Oh my God, I would have to learn so damn much to get through a game like that. Because those are not games I really played, and
no, I didn't play very many of them. Yeah, and I was always intimidated by them too.
I feel like I played a little bit of Mech Warrior 2, but oh my God, that is a tough genre to like come in cold to. Something we'll talk about for sure, Takalock. That is interesting. I have a friend who's doing a friend or acquaintance on Twitter who's doing something. It's in the mech. I'm going to look him up while we're talking, but he's doing a mech kind of thing. It's Trent Polak. He is doing it's called Steel Hunters. His company is Joy Machine Games, and it's very much in that like PC mech universe. So if you're looking for one, you haven't seen one in a while, that is kind of up your alley.
Well, they just announced new Mech Warrior.
Oh, they did.
PC free to play. It's by the original FASA guys that have left some of them at least. I think Jordan and those guys.
All right, so that's still out there. Jordan.
I forget his last name. He's
kind of not Mechner.
No. It's
Jordan.
It's one of the original FASA guys, right? And Shadowrun.
Weitzman.
Yeah, Shadowrun and Mech.
Yeah, Shadowrun is the one I thought of immediately.
Yeah, they still own both IPs. They're just independent now. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, so that stuff's still out there, and maybe we'll see something. But if a big one comes out, we're like, well, I mean, everybody's playing this. We have to play something that is connected to that.
Yeah.
I think we'll turn back to that. So thank you, Takalock. Thank you, Lucas, although I feel like we reread that email. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Jonathan, for your contributions. You can send those to devgameclub@gmail.com or put it in the review notes, reviews for the podcast in podcasts on Apple or whatever thing that you use. Yeah, we're late and long overdue on re-rolling the folks who gave us reviews. We had originally asked for the San Francisco Kid and maybe Eric Anderson, I think were the names. But we never heard from them. So it's time to re-roll for the Starfighter comic series, Jedi Starfighter comic series, written by Hayden Blackman and inked by somebody who's not Hayden Blackman, and a Fallout 3 special edition. And I think I'll just reach into the hat here, and it looks like Chad Barth, if you're out there, we would like to send you some comic books that describe the Starfighter Trap, I think is what it was called. Is that what it was called? Something like that. Oh, no, Crossbones.
Crossbones, yeah.
Starfighter Trap was a thing that they wrote for the original Starfighter, which was...
I think the artist is actually pretty well-known artist, too. Pretty good artist.
On Crossbones? I will tell you, it's here. It's Blackman, Box, obviously not Blackman, and Fernandez,
maybe. Anyway, I forget. Yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah.
Pencils were Ramon Box, and inks by Raul Fernandez. It's a good series, Crossbones, and I look forward to sending it to you. If you will send you to devgameclub@gmail.com your snail mail address, and I'll also send out to you Dario's. No, I'm kidding. And then the other person that we heard from, one of the reviews that I picked out was from Shibby Train. I have for you a Fallout 3 Special Edition. I have cracked the plastic, but only to check to make sure that everything was in it. It is otherwise pristine. I haven't taken the game out. Those are rare. Those are rare. I never play my games after they come out, at least until a decade has passed. And so there was a Fallout. Yeah, there's an Xbox version, I believe, of the Fallout 3, Xbox 360 edition of Fallout 3 Special Edition. So you get the, I don't know, there was a
you get a lunchbox.
Pip-Boy, there was a lunchbox. There was a
the Pip-Boy. You get
the bobblehead.
Yeah,
a lot of stuff in there. So we have other stuff as we get to the next level of, like, if we get 150 reviews, we'll pick out new stuff to send out to people.
Well, we have some humdingers too.
We do have some good stuff, and I want to get that out of my house in the next year or so. So, Chad Barth, Shibby Train, send me at devgameclub@gmail.com your snail mail address, and I will send those things out at no cost to you. I still have the Star Wars Stormtrooper with a lightsaber thing that we were going to send out. It's a Macquarie concept, and I have that address, so I'm sending it out to you as soon as I get these addresses.
Rare figure, right?
It's a rare figure. It was fan choice number 4 for something.
It was the 90s series of the action figures. So this is actually when they reissued them after in the 90s. So it's actually those are semi-valuable.
Yeah, all this stuff is kind of hard to come by, at least in its physical form, and we're glad to pass it on to you. Mostly since I don't want to have it in my house anymore. But yeah. Anyway, next time. You want to talk a little bit about next time?
So we occasionally like to do kind of what we call a bonus episode, especially for series that have sort of a legacy around them. And so we obviously thought it'd be good to play some of Half-Life 2. So we thought maybe 2-3 hours, right?
No specific endpoint, but just like jump in.
Yeah, we'll just jump in, like we kind of did with Last Guardian, right?
Yeah, exactly. Play a bit, see where we get, and
and then we're going to talk about it next week to kind of cap off the Half-Life stuff with 2 great interviews and Half-Life 1 and then some of Half-Life 2. I think will be good for Valve for a while. And then we're still thinking about our next one after that. So if you have ideas, let us know. But we have more to talk about there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we've certainly had some emails. We have some thoughts. I'm actually going to be near to Tim at the beginning of August. And not too near.
Can't wait.
And we'll have a chance maybe to play something.
That's right. Yeah.
Record a podcast in the same room
same
for the first time.
Yeah, same screen.
So we can look at some kind of weird stuff at that point, and we may try to schedule something around that. So we'll see how that goes. If you have any weird thoughts, especially things that we could still get on a PC at this point, an older thing that is just weird and we could play on one keyboard or 2 controllers on one device would be great. But I guess that's going to be it for us this week. So I am at Brett Duville with an underscore in the middle there at Twitter, and he is
at Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
You can find the podcast at DevGameClub and on the web at www.devgameclub.com. Shoot us an email at devgameclub@gmail.com. And for now, I will simply say good night.
Good night.